We stood outside the corral as he spoke with the non-hurriedness of grazing horses. He wore blue jeans, button-down long-sleeve shirt, squared-off boots with manure on the edges, and a sweat-stained cowboy hat. Thanks to Laurie, we stood within a unique historical moment that would lay quiet and unknown for most of the world. Laurie Pound-Feille and I met in 2009 when we gathered with a few others to help rebuild much of Eagle, Alaska after the spring flooding of the Yukon River. Together we learned a little about Hankuchin culture and how little we knew about the Alaskan bush. Horses danced in the background. There was an edge to the excitement filling the air. Sorrels, buckskins, duns, and bays weaved among one another, always with one eye on us. Yesterday, the horses had returned. After Little Bighorn in 1876, Sitting Bull and his followers left the Dakotas to find refuge in the cypress hills of Wood Mountain in Saskatchewan. Starvation forced him and others back to Standing Rock in 1881 on a military train. Today, horse descendants had returned to the landscape of their ancestors. In 2016, on the Standing Rock Reservation, representing and speaking on behalf of the General Minister and President, Laurie spoke in protest for the Dakota Access Pipeline. She returned in -10 January weather again to support Standing Rock people when everyone else stayed home in their warm homes. Then moved on to organize yearly trips to Standing Rock for existing and future disciple leaders. Ancient dust rose into the air from ancestral horses. Where a canyon slope flattened, horse and human, dirt and wind became one. Distances vanished, time was displaced, kinship renewed and melted into siblingship on the day the horses returned. Laurie is an organizer, a leader, a speaker, a writer of words. Yet her center holds the silence and the space of ancestral horses. I'm excited for you to experience the voice of the Palomino.
I am so nervous. I have preached in front of hundreds of people, spoken in front of hundreds of people, but this is the most intimidating situation because the question that was asked of me to speak on was the impact of the doctrine of discovery on my worldview. Well, thanks to Crow Eddie and to our General Minister and President Terry Hord Owens, they set the stage for me. Because for me to live forward, I have to look back. For you to understand what the impact of the doctrine of discovery is on my worldview, you have to know where I came from, which is not always pretty. And that's that vulnerable, feeling very intimidated at the moment. So I invite you into my world for just a small period of time. And it's not always a good world. So I was born in Hattiesburg, Mississippi in the late 1950s. I'd like to say like the really late 1950s. 1958 to be exact. So, I was born there and I grew up there. And I went to the University of Southern Mississippi where my father was a music professor. My parents were from Michigan and Ohio. I was the only one born in Mississippi in my family. But in my entire family, I'm the only one born in Mississippi, so I was the one that was impacted the most by the culture of Mississippi. Mississippi, if you had asked me as a child, if you had asked me in high school, and if you asked me when I was in college and after college, I would have told you that it was a wonderful place. Beautiful trees, wonderful people. I had the best friends. We could go down to the coast and eat fresh seafood right off the boats. I mean, we could get to New Orleans, we could get to Mobile, it's just a fabulous place to live. But there's another part of Mississippi. In fact, the true Mississippi. And that has to do with how I grew up. How many of y'all have ever heard of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission? Brian has. So I grew up in what would be called a controlled state. A perfect example is when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered. It was nowhere on TVs in Mississippi or in the newspapers. Now that sounds, how could that happen, right? Well, there's a reporter who wrote a book, and it's called Of Long Memory. And he came when Byron Day LeBeckwith, who murdered Medgar Evers, when he had the trials in the 1990s, he came back to cover this trial because, you know, in Mississippi, you could kill people and get away with it. Gosh, that may be happening today, but you could kill people and get away with it. And so he was being retried, and this journalist from New York came to cover it. Now, understand, in Mississippi, people from New York are seen as the other, for sure, right? Anyway, and he discovered, after talking to people, that there was a certain age group that didn't know the history of the civil rights movement in Mississippi. And that was, and I meant to bring the book because I'm going to get the years wrong, but it's like 1955 to 1961, right? I mean, it's a definite period of time. Well, that's when the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission was in play, and they controlled what was in our textbooks. They controlled what was on the news. They controlled what was in the newspapers. So I literally grew up not knowing. I didn't know who Emmett Till was. I didn't know that a house in my hometown had been firebombed. I didn't know about Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because I was not taught it. That doesn't mean that my family didn't have discussions in the home, but I wasn't taught any of this. Now, that's no excuse for not knowing, especially as an adult. I know now. Don't worry. I do know now. But what's interesting, the reason I'm sharing this with you is what's interesting is we weren't taught about our indigenous siblings who were Choctaw in Mississippi. And we weren't taught their history, but we all knew that Mississippi was Choctaw country, as they would say. And Mississippi seemed to be very proud about Choctaws, right? But they didn't teach anything about it. I still haven't uncovered what that's about. So if somebody knows, if a historian knows, such as Dr. Barnett, I would appreciate knowing. But I do know, and I want to share with you, and you probably can't read that, sorry. The Choctaws were obviously in Mississippi, but they were other places too. The end of the French and Indian War in 1763 put the Choctaw in a precarious situation. And you need to know this comes directly from the Choctaw Band in Mississippi, their website. So I went to first source. This isn't me writing this at all. All lands east of the Mississippi River were transferred from the French to the English, while French land to the west of the river went to the Spanish. And that arrangement, of course, as we know, did not last long because the Revolutionary War came. But here is, I've got 2 slides here I want to share with you. Do you know about the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek? Okay. In 1830. Oh, those wonderful 1830 years, right? Those wonderful treaties that we love to sign and then our government does not uphold. But that treaty, there were several treaties. In 1786, reaffirmed the boundaries of tribal land and reaffirmed Choctaw sovereignty. However, from 1801 to 1830, the Choctaw signed a series of treaties with the United States, which eventually led to the loss of all territory east of the Mississippi. Some 32 million acres of land, and a move to Oklahoma. Fortunately for the Choctaw, this is on their website, so I don't know that I would use fortunately, but I understand the use of the word here. The 1830 Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek allowed the Choctaw who did not want to move to Oklahoma to stay. And they became U.S. citizens. And were awarded land grants based on the size of each family. And there are some 4,000 Choctaw who chose not to leave the state, to leave Mississippi. Now, oh my gosh, you really can't read this. I'm sorry. So it was supposedly a treaty of perpetual friendship, but of course limits began at that time. What most people don't know is you think, oh, isn't that nice? If you're looking at the world with only one viewpoint, isn't that nice? They allowed some Choctaw to stay, right? No, right. The problem is the Choctaw who did stay, then the boarding schools came, which I have a slide listing the boarding schools. And the way you paid for boarding school was you paid the $6,000 that you got from the government. You gave that to the boarding school, which was run by the church. So the church got the money that should have gone to the families. So it's not a pretty story. I was never taught this in high school. I wasn't taught this in college, but I was a business major. We didn't care about history, right? We didn't care about history. Yes, all right. So after 1830, virtually none of the Choctaw who received land in Mississippi still retained it. They were stamped out of it or forced out of it, but many of them had to give the land and their money to the boarding school to pay for their child to, yeah, okay. So they left for Oklahoma, though many of them went ahead and just left for Oklahoma. And those who remained in Mississippi survived the rest of the 19th century by living off the land or becoming tenant farmers and sharecroppers on land that had once been theirs. In the early 20th century, the poor conditions, as we know, which happens on reservations or just in the county that they lived in, no resources were going to it, right? The state of Mississippi wasn't going to help them. The state of Mississippi didn't want to help a lot of people. The federal government did step in to assist the tribe during the 1918 influenza epidemic. It killed more than 25% of the Mississippi Choctaw. During the 1920s, the Bureau of Indian Affairs established elementary schools, which are still going on, by the way, and are really good schools and well funded at the moment. I just feel obligated to share the names of the Indian, as they said, Indian boarding schools. And I will tell you, for the Presbyterians in the room, the majority of the boarding schools in Mississippi were run by the Presbyterian Church. I was shocked to find that out, by the way. I thought they would all be Catholic, not Presbyterian. But there was Bethel Mission School, Charity Hall Mission School, Choctaw Central Indian School, middle school, and a high school, which those are the names of the schools now. They're not obviously not boarding schools anymore. Elliott School, Emmaus Mission School, Martin Mission School, and Mayhew School. Now, I want you to think, I should have done a slide. I want you to think about the size of the state of Mississippi and how many boarding schools there were in a state that's really not that big. But then we should think, Mississippi was not a great place for our African-American siblings to live. And we haven't even dealt with what we did to our indigenous siblings. So here's a state that has such a bad history, and that is the state in which I grew up, that I went all of my public school, even my college education. Right. Talk about, and I was in those years where nothing was in the textbooks. All right. So I'm jumping ahead. I'm not going to give you my full life history here. So I'm jumping ahead to when I was a youth minister at First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Garland, Texas. And that's a suburb of Dallas. And, you know, we love to take kids on mission trips. Just so you know, over the years, we've changed the language to servant trips instead of mission trips, because the word mission does not have a good connotation. It sounds like we're going in and we're going to make people believe like us or do what we think they need. And I was looking for a place to take people. And to be honest, I really don't know how I came across this. But I decided for those New Mexicans in the room, we took them to the Navajo Reservation and went to Tehachapi, New Mexico. Sound familiar, Stella?
Yes.
Yes.
Gallup.
Yes, north of Gallup. You go to Gallup and you go north on Route 666, by the way. Yeah, 666, yeah. The high school kids were like, we're doing what? We're going up. And we went to St. Mary's Mission. I found this mission, and there was a Catholic priest, Father John. And Father John was not your typical Catholic priest. And he was more than welcoming of us to come and to, and I kept saying, well, what will we do, right? We're going to do a vacation Bible school? Are we going to go and fix people's homes? Tell us, are we going to teach people how to fix their own homes, as if people don't know how to fix their homes, right? Tell us what we're going to do. And he kept saying, just come, just come. We'll find something, you know. So we go, and we cleaned out a cemetery. And other than that, we did not do any other work. He had 2 youth from the reservation travel with us and take us around the reservation to a secret swimming hole, right? To go up into, there's an incredibly beautiful forest, right, that's there. And we went into that some would say is a national forest, but Navajos say, no, that is our forest, right? Beautiful, beautiful. We saw a bear up there. I mean, it was, and we got to travel around. We got to play bingo the night of bingo, when the whole community came to play bingo. He had a prayer hogan that was built at the mission for the people of the community to practice and do their rituals and everything in their prayer hogan, because that's what would have been the normal thing to do. So he wasn't your typical Catholic priest. And when we went into the church, we saw this most incredible mural on the wall. I have a poster of it because I was so overwhelmed at the beauty of it. And I happen to have a picture that I took off the internet, and it has a Catholic priest standing in front of it. And I thought, you know what? This needs to be shown. But there's a mural, and I don't know, is it still there? I would think St. Mary's would still have it. But this is a Navajo Jesus. And in, you know, where there's usually like the Sacred Heart and it's red, it's turquoise. And if you look in the back there's a hogan. And then there's the brush of the land. There's being the good shepherd, the Navajo Jesus being a good shepherd. I had never seen Jesus other than good old blonde hair, blue-eyed, white Jesus, who we know did not exist, right? And we were all so taken with this. We couldn't believe the beauty of this, and how Father John had said, yeah, I said, paint what you want. Make this your play, do what you want. And this beautiful mural. At the same time, if you look at this picture, then we've got the Catholic priest standing there too. And now that I'm a little wiser, while all of this is wonderful and good, there's still that assimilation happening here, right? There's still so is this viewing the world two different ways, or is this a church saying, yeah, you can put Navajo Jesus there, but we're still going to do our ritual and you're still going to take communion in this way, right? This is something for all of us to contemplate, because we walk in, we see things, and we think, wow, this is fantastic. And then you have to start really thinking about, what am I seeing? But I have to tell you, this mural really is fantastic in person. So from there, I learned a lot. I learned that the experience that we had was more important than the work we did in cleaning out a cemetery. And the youth who went on that trip, as adults now, still speak of that trip. Out of all the trips we took, they still speak of that one because of what they learned. The time they spent in the prayer hogan, the time they spent talking with the elders, the time they spent with the youth, of learning, and things that they would say, well, they didn't teach us that in class. We didn't know this. What do you mean this? That way of opening their vision. So my next experience I want to share with you is the Eagle Village, Alaska. Was that 2009? No. Really? Okay. Anyway, sorry. We can debate. No. Anyway, this is Eagle, Alaska. And if you look up to the top, you see Eagle. And then if you look down here, you'll see Eagle Village. And that's the border with Canada right there. You'll see Eagle Village. Eagle Village is an Indigenous village. Eagle, Alaska is the town or village. The official town is Eagle. And as Dave said, the Yukon River had one of those times where it thawed, it melted, and then refroze. An early thaw. Thawed, refroze. I think it did it like 2 or 3 times. So then when the big thaw came, it was this huge amount of ice that came down the river. And I realized it came down the river, which is actually going up in this picture. So it came down the river and it wiped out everything in its path. Eagle, the town, the houses by the river, they got damaged, but they were also up on a bit of a hill. Plus, running water wasn't a real thing there anyway, right? I laugh because we had to, it was porta potties for 3 weeks and shower at the school for 3 weeks because there was no water. But Eagle Village was not up on a hill. And Eagle Village got wiped out. And there was a call put out from FEMA to like Good or Samaritan's Purse and the Mennonites, right, Dave? It was the Mennonites who came in, who do incredible woodwork, by the way. And they were asked to build log cabins at Eagle Village, because the flood happened. They couldn't get in until July. And you have to get out of there by the end of September, or else you can't get back out because of the cold and the snow. Well, the people of the village, as well as the town, they spend those months fishing for salmon, going into Fairbanks and getting all their canned goods and other dry goods supplies, and then coming back. And they are hunters, and they need to kill a moose, a bear, and an elk. I think I have that right. The moose and the bear, I know I have right. I think it's elk. It's not caribou. It's elk. And they have to kill them so that they have meat over the winter. Well, you can't build a home and do all that. There's no way. So that's why FEMA called people in. Somehow, Christian Church Disciples of Christ, disciples volunteering at the time, got on that list. And there was a call put out for anybody that wanted to go build. I went. I answered the call. So we went to Alaska for 3 weeks and tried to build a cabin. We had to go, because there wasn't enough money for the village, we had to go and scavenge off of the beach of the river, the banks of the river, the insulation that had been flooded. We had to use that. We did get some logs that were brought in for the cabin, but anything else for the cabin, we had to go down to the banks of the river and get the supplies and scavenge through everything. That wasn't true for Eagle. And it began to be very obvious that Eagle Village was not getting the same treatment and help that Eagle was. It was at this moment in my life that Dave shared the doctrine of discovery. We would sit in these trailers at night, and Dave would teach us. And the doctrine of discovery, and I kept saying, I've never heard of that. How did I not hear the doctrine of discovery? I know manifest destiny, and that was a great thing. But yeah, I'm kidding. And so we began to learn about it, and all of a sudden you're thinking, this is something's not right here, right? Eagle Village right now has a population of 74 people. Well, I don't care if it was 2 people. They needed the same amount of help as Eagle. If it was 1 person, they need the same amount of help. They actually need more help because they don't have, they were never given the resources from the government for that. So Eagle, Alaska opened my eyes in ways that I began to be able to look back where I had been. It really made me reflect on going to Tahachi. And so grateful that the priest there did make sure we had an experience and learned that we don't need to come in and fix anything for anybody. We need to come in and learn and listen to the people and find out how we can help, right? Not us thinking we know. All right, so my next experience, how am I doing time-wise? Am I doing okay? Okay, the next experience I want to share with you is Standing Rock. There was a call put out in November of 2016 from an Episcopal priest that serves at Standing Rock, Reverend John Floberg. And he asked, at that time, the government had really surrounded Standing Rock. And he thought the only way to help was to have the clergy come. So he put out a call for 500 clergy, and more than 500 of us showed up. And at that time, which was true the whole time, you could stand at Standing Rock and look across the river, and on the hills there were snipers. And they had their guns aimed on everybody. They didn't care that clergy were there. They could have cared less. And they had their guns aimed on us. John wanted us to come. Sorry, he's a friend of mine now, so I should have said Reverend Floberg, but John wanted us to come and have the Christian denominations repudiate the doctrine of discovery. And I'm like, I've heard of that. I learned about the doctrine. I know about the doctrine of discovery. And I was all excited. So I talked to our regional minister and I said, I'm going to Standing Rock. Let me have the statement where we've repudiated the doctrine of discovery as the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Because I'm going and I can take it, or the general minister at the time can come, or you can come. Just let's go. So our regional minister called the general minister, and guess what? We had not repudiated it. And I was like, well, I got to have something to say. I can't just, And I was told, well, we work with everybody. So we don't all need a separate statement. We're part of everybody's statement. And I was like, no, that's not going to work. We need to repudiate. So I was sent a statement about the problem with oil companies. The problem with oil companies. I'm not saying there's not a problem with oil companies, but that's what I was sent to stand at Standing Rock and say. So I got there, and here's Wiccans, you name it, every type of faith, every thought, belief was represented, and they all stood there and symbolically, with a piece of paper, burned shared their statement and burned the doctrine of discovery in the fire at Standing Rock. And I'm standing there going, oh my goodness, we are not, this is not good. Yeah. So I talked to John Floberg about it, and he said, I want you to speak when we're out on the road near the snipers. Oh. Well, that makes sense. Since we don't have a statement, you might as well just put us out there on the road near the snipers. Because he was not even going to let us speak, because he was disgusted with us, to be very honest. And I don't blame him, because he had asked for
What year was
2016. You weren't the general minister.
it? Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know.
No. I would not have done that in front of you, but yeah, you weren't. Yes. So we go out on the road and we go to the bridge, and you may have remember pictures of cars that were set on fire on a bridge. Well, we're right at that bridge, and that's Cannonball River there. Just literally on the other side, there's military standing there with guns, and there's snipers up in the hill. And I got up on this flatbed truck, and I had this statement that I had been told by the denomination to read. And I thought, you know what? I'm the one standing here. I'm going to say what I think we should have said. And that's exactly what I did. I said what I thought we should have said. And I did say that, we are calling our churches to work toward repudiating the doctrine of discovery. And then I went back, and the congregation I was serving at the time, First Christian Minneapolis, that January, we took a vote to repudiate the doctrine of discovery. I'm like, if the denomination's not going to do it, this church is going to do it. So we did that. But I have learned from not knowing history, and how a controlled state, which is what's trying to happen right now, can wipe out the history, which I know I'm preaching to the choir here about that, but the history's wiped out. You're not taught it. And then all of a sudden you have these experiences where you're like, wait a minute, there's a whole world out here that we don't know about. So with Standing Rock, in that moment, that this is not a moment of, yay, Laurie, it's just a moment of a person knowing what the church should be saying and having the opportunity, and who's going to pull me off that flatbed truck, right? Nobody, there were several other disciples there, but they were in agreement. So Standing Rock became a place that I wanted to make sure that high school students knew about. I didn't want them to grow up like I did. And so we did start a camp in conjunction with the Standing Rock tribe. They got to meet the tribal leaders. They got to go into the tribal offices and meet the tribal leaders. They got to have this incredible experience with the horses. Dave was a part of that. And they did learn. They learned a lot. COVID came, and that stopped the camp. And now I'm retired, but we could start it again. Anyway, one more experience here. Dave asked me if I would represent the Center for Indigenous Ministries at the boarding school healing initiative. And so I went to, they were meeting in Carlisle, which, as you know, was a very famous boarding school. And interesting enough, when I got there, that's when I learned that the boarding school healing initiative was located, 5 blocks from the church I served in Minneapolis. I didn't know that until I went to Pennsylvania. Once again, didn't need to know, right? There, I heard the stories of people who were at Carlisle, people that were at other schools, and met tribal leaders who had come to reclaim and take their children home who are buried at Carlisle, who died at the boarding school. Because the government just doesn't let you take your people home, right? That's wrong. It's wrong. And every boarding school, everyone should be able to be allowed to go and bring their children home. Carlisle changed my view again, because all of a sudden I'm hearing stories that I didn't know, because I didn't know about the boarding school. And to hear people talk about what they did learn and then the traumas they went through, and then the whole stories of wanting to claim their children and take them back home to their land. Talk about seeing the world in two ways. Yeah. And if you're going to do that as white people, it's going to break your heart, but nobody needs to see your tears. Let me put it that way. It's not up to any other group to take care of you. It's for you, right? It's for you to find a way to process what you've heard and to stand with. Believe what you hear and stand with. So I live in Minneapolis. Brian and I live in Minneapolis. You may have heard of it in the news lately. Minneapolis is a beautiful, wonderful place, and I'm very grateful that I live there right now. Due to the experiences that I've had along the way in my life, I see the beauty of the Indigenous community in Minneapolis and how they are just the fabric of society. But there's also still discrimination. There's also still places Indigenous are not recognized. And what is happening there is wrong in many ways. Reverend John Floberg, my friend I told you about, he posted this on Facebook the other day. My point is this: when we witness an ICE agent running after someone they believe to be undocumented, they are in reality trying to reinforce white privilege, or I would say systemic white supremacy. These United States does not possess moral authority over the land. The possession of land should return to the people of the treaty or the people of whose land was stolen while they were forcibly removed to a place beyond a boundary of someone else's making. There are 4 Oglala Sioux men who have been picked up by ICE and taken to detention centers. There is someone from the Standing Rock tribe who has been taken to the detention centers. If I had not had all of these experiences, I may not realize how horrific and how ignorant and how horrifying that is. What are we doing picking up our Indigenous sibling? What are we doing picking anyone up? But what are we doing picking up our Indigenous sibling? The good news is the majority of people in Minneapolis, I'm not going to say all of Minnesota, the majority of people in Minneapolis know this and are outraged and are speaking out against it. But everybody needs to know this, and everybody needs to understand just how horrific it is that has happened. I did this one just so that I would remember to tell you. Actually, the slides were just to keep me on track. The American Indian movement started in Minneapolis in the 60s. And their structure of how to care for the neighborhoods, how to do the neighborhood watches, and how to make sure people have food, that is what we're doing in our neighborhoods. We are following the American Indian movement. And Brian and I watch for the school that's in our backyard. We do patrols. We've made sure families have food because we have families not coming because they're afraid. So we have learned from the American Indian movement in that. Little Earth is the largest urban living housing project for Indigenous in the country. I wish I could say that it was modern and well kept. And again, Minneapolis is supposedly on the forefront of all this, and Little Earth suffers from resources. Sean Sherman, you may know of him, the Sioux chef. His restaurant in Womney is amazing, absolutely amazing. The food is like the best I've ever had. He only cooks what would have been local. It changes with the seasons of what would have been cooked right there on the banks of the Mississippi. That's where his restaurant is located. And he is doing this around the country to help other Indigenous chefs be able to cook what was local in their area. And if nothing else, he's taught us all that, hey, just because we eat moose or whatever in Minnesota doesn't mean that's what our Indigenous siblings in Mississippi eat, right? So he's trying to create this network of restaurants that are serving and cooking. And I know there's one here in Tulsa because we ate at it.
Native.
Yes. Yeah. And so, anyway, that to let you know some of the things that you begin to notice when you look at the world with more than one view. One last thing, I'm doing a plug for, we have a call from the Indigenous leaders in Minneapolis for everyone to come to Minneapolis on February 7th on Saturday. I realize that's Saturday. The Whipple building, you're going to go into the Whipple building. I know that Dr. Barnett will go into the history of that, but let's just say it's named after Bishop Whipple, who spent his life fighting for Indigenous rights. And that's where they're detaining people. Bishop Whipple would not like this. So they're calling everyone, Indigenous leaders, community members, people of faith, anybody to come, and they're going to symbolically serve an eviction notice to the government. It's going to be beautiful. Yes, and that's just, if you see this on Facebook or social media, click on it. That's how you can find more information. All right, so let me reintroduce myself. My people are from Wales, Scotland, Ireland, England, and several other countries. I don't have a drop of North American indigenous blood in me. I'm 75% Welsh, Scot, and Irish. I was born on land that was stolen from the Choctaws. I have lived on land that was stolen from the Muskogee Creek and the Cherokees when I lived in Atlanta. I have lived on land that was stolen from the Comanche, Wichita, and Caddo when I lived in Texas. And I now live on land that was stolen from the Dakota and the Ojibwe Anishinaabe. Sorry. The doctrine of discovery has caused untold harm. And I do mean it's been told, it's been shared, but people aren't listening. And I'm doing what I can every single day to dismantle it. Thank you. How to get out of that.
Let's go ahead and go into a question and answer piece for Laurie. And again, for the folks who are online, if you put yours in the chat, Clayton will pick that up and we'll do as much as we can. I'll start, Laurie, since I had it too. All of those experiences matter. And the horrificness of it. And yet, this has been talked about in, at least with disciples, for a period of time. And yet we know 90% of the church doesn't know anything about it.
That's right. That's right.
So, hey, what do we do different? Do you have any ideas? What road do we go down today? And I know this is it can't. and yet it's that piece. What is the first thought?
Well, one thought is something we are working with our this general minister and president with, is making sure that the Center for Indigenous Ministries has a voice at the table, so that the board members of our denomination even are learning and hearing. But I think we've got to let pastors know too, because just like if I didn't know everything I knew, I wouldn't necessarily have come back and said, okay, church, we're repudiating the doctrine of discovery. I would have been more like, oh, I just can't wait until our denomination does, right? I would have thought broader. I wouldn't have thought right there in my neighborhood, right there, this is what we can do. I think the Standing Rock camp, I think that made a difference. Making sure our high school, really elementary, I mean, in kindergarten, right?
And regional ministers.
And regional ministers. For us, for denominations, you might have, we have like a minister that's over a certain region. And so that person needs to know, like they should be here. And I know this is getting recorded, but they should be here at our winter talks. Yes. Did that answer your question? Did you put me in the hot seat on purpose?
No, I would never. Thank you, Lord.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anything online yet?
Nothing online yet.
So questions here. I think I'm fine. All right.
It's not so much a question, it's just in your opening comments, you said you didn't know anything about it until. I didn't know anything about MTM until I moved to Chicago as a full-grown mother of four person. I was born and reared in Kansas.
Oh,
So it's the information that we are allowed, or we are taught, and very much the school system when I was coming up was controlled by those in power.
right.
Those people with the white privilege.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things were left out. We had images of the people in Africa, you know, we were slaves.
Right.
Yeah, there are
right.
images of the savage Indians who we could watch on the cowboy shows, but not any usable, viable information that will have us look at other people like, well, no, there's no difference. Still,
Right.
they're people, they're humans just like I am.
Right.
And I think that what you're doing, being taking kids to be exposed to know what other people in different parts of the country, what they are experiencing, how they live, and how their culture is. I think that that's to be commended.
Well, thank you. It's, yeah. And you're right about that, and which why some people think, oh, it's okay that they're removing things from the Smithsonian. No, it is not okay. It is not okay to remove this history. So, because they're removing history to make it all white. And that's not who we are. Anyway, go ahead, sorry. Oh,
With Laurie, was, we had a little thing about infill,
yes.
career and marriage. Now, it was where did I learn about infill? It wasn't at all from schools. It was from the church.
Yeah.
It was from pastors and other people that were involved in the civil rights movement. So I learned all my civil rights history from the church.
Wow. Yeah, we didn't teach that in Mississippi churches, did we? We did have some pastors, not necessarily disciple, but we did have some pastors who tried. Yeah. Oh,
I just want to weigh in on this whole notion of how we, reach out to the church. And I think very early on in my term as GMP, I invited Dave to come and be
yes.
the primary person for our retreat and to talk about the Doctrine of Discovery. And again, some of the feedback was, oh my gosh, I didn't know anything about it. And the other feedback was, well, last year you were doing something on cultural intelligence, and the year before that, Sharon did some on anti-racism. When are we going to talk about something else?
Mm-hmm.
And there's still within our church, even like anti-racism training. Oh, here we go again. This kind of work, but we do have. I think that the regional ministers are a good place to begin to start, and our work to see if Center for Indigenous Ministries, what relationships that they have with the office of GFP, that places it in a different kind of relationship with the whole church. And then going forward, some of the platform that we're going to be using for our online assemblies, that there's really a church-wide platform that the intent is that it's not just used for the online assembly. It could be used in places, say just Zoom seminars,
right.
like that. And I think there are other opportunities that I know, just to give you an idea of the attitude, this people who were around me when I started, they were like, I was like, so what is Wonder Talk? I think, Laurie, you hadn't told me about it. And somebody said, oh, well, maybe you should go like once during your time, and that'll be sufficient.
We'll be satisfied.
So you can show up. And I was like, when I came, I was like, why aren't, like you say, people need to be in this room, and we need to be able to draw these connections between everything that's happened under the Doctrine of Discovery to so many people in our church, and help people really get clear. My dad is a retired African American Studies professor, so I had to read a book a week. I heard about white people when I was growing up, or I didn't get half of my allowance. I didn't learn that Indigenous history. What I learned growing up in Indiana, what's his name? John Rogers Clark? Paul Rogers Clark?
John
George
John-
Rogers Clark.
Oh, yeah.
So he's part of the Louisiana Purchase, and they're going through. So George Rogers Clark is like revered as this great discoverer in Indiana. But I lived along the Wabash River, right? So
Right.
there are all sorts of, they're clearly across the whole continent, but it's still not talked about. But I just want to acknowledge, I know we've still got a lot of work to do, and I certainly want to keep doing what I can.
Yeah, you've done a lot, so we appreciate it. One of the things that you just said about people getting irritated, oh, we're gonna do that again, right? When are we gonna talk about something else? I have this soapbox that I get on that says we shouldn't be doing trainings because we've been doing trainings for generations and nothing has changed. That people need to have an experience. If we're going to transform hearts, they've got to have an experience. And so we have a lot of churches in Iowa, Disciples churches, not very many in Minnesota. So some of our Iowa churches will say things like, well, we could learn about our Indigenous siblings or our African American siblings, but we don't have any in our town. So how are we going to have an experience? And I said, well, why don't you have any in your town? And they're like, well, because they don't. And I said, are you sure you don't have any in your town? And if you really don't, you need to look at the history of why you don't, right? That's an experience. Go discover your history and find out why you don't. Yeah. Anyway, my soapbox, sorry.
Right. It can be so overwhelming when I think of the magnitude of the change that needs to happen. But I was so inspired by what Crow said today about the possibility of ongoing evolution
Right.
of beliefs and commitments, and it helps me to think, well, I don't. What I should be doing is, not being overly burdened by the size of the task, but to be encouraged to be part of that evolution.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And as I keep telling people, especially what we've learned from the American Indian movement in Minneapolis is start with your neighborhood, take care for your neighborhood, make sure the children in your neighborhood know the stories. And if you do that, then it should ripple out. It should. That doesn't mean don't do larger platforms. It just means make sure that people around you know the stories and the truth. Knowing that once again, if you are not Indigenous, you're telling someone else's story, but you need to tell your side of what your culture did, right? You've got to tell what we did. Got to tell the truth.
One last question.
We've got a comment from chat that what I've learned from Wendelin is we can't afford to get stuck in guilt. That is paralyzing. And that the Indigenous community does not need to learn their own history. We settlers need to catch up so that we can be at the same place to start relationships.
That's right. That's right.
Can I just say that Canadian Christians are so far beyond where people in the U.S. are, and that's one of the great concerns. We're in full communion with the United Church in Canada, and they are, again, they struggle with the same things. And as much as they try to give place to like the elders of the Indigenous tribes, there's a whole different governance and counseling structure that denomination is built that honors. They have lots of Indigenous congregations, which in our denomination, we just don't have. But you go to their assemblies and there are Indigenous religious practices that are built in to their worship, and they're constantly talking about, they use that language, settlers.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things that we've identified that we want to work with them on. And on the opposite side, they have no tools to deal with racism.
Right.
They just, it's impolite to talk about it. You've got frustrated people from Africa and Asia and all over the world who are frustrated to be Canadians because nobody really wants to address
Yeah.
that particular piece, because we're just all Canadians, aren't we? And
Right.
we understand, even though we say we're all Americans, we don't.
Right.
That's another angle of hope, I think, that I have, is learning from our Canadian siblings who have wrestled with this perhaps more honestly than we have.
Absolutely, yeah. And I just want to say one last thing, especially with the way the world is right now, and it happened when Mr. Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. People reacted, white people reacted by saying, well, this isn't us. This isn't the United States. It is the United States. We took this land by violence. We brought slave labor by violence. It is who we are. And it's time that we dealt with it, reckoned with it, and start living a different way. But we've got to deal with it, or it's just going to keep repeating. Yeah.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you.